Hello everyone, this is part 22 of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy and in the Anbu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
The third Hokage puffed on his pipe, his hands folded on top of his oak desk and his hat slid down to hide his eyes. It was hard to read any emotion on that indecipherable face, but every member of Team Sigma, spread out on the other side of the desk, had a sense that the old man was quite annoyed. At the head of the Anbu team, Naruto waited his punishment with a blank face. He had disobeyed standing orders and intervened in a situation that was out of his jurisdiction, right in front of the elite Anbu of Kirigakure, no less. Although what he did was morally right, should the fourth Mizukage take offense, it could set off a chain of events that, in the best possible scenario, had a negative impact on Konoha, and in the worst possible scenario, would lead to war. He knew this. Uzumaki Naruto had been in Anbu for almost 6 years. He had been a captain for over a year. He knew the regulations. He had passed his emotional conditioning course with flying colors. Still, some tiny, small, rebellious part of him stubbornly refused to see his actions as anything more than doing the right thing, and, for once, Naruto was content with that. He had saved some lives. It wasn't often that he got to do that. That was why he would meet the gaze of the Hokage evenly, fully prepared to accept the consequences of his actions. The old man in question let out a sigh, dropping his hands and pushing away the open scroll. He had been reading a detailed report on exactly what had occurred at Outpost Sierra. He puffed on his pipe a few more times, and then moved it from his mouth. Stern, unyielding eyes shot up and glared at the blonde Anbu captain. Uzumaki Naruto, Sarutobi Hiruzen murmured. Are you prepared for the consequences of your actions? His quiet voice echoed around the office. The rest of Team Sigma remained still. Naruto could feel more than see Sasuke behind him, the usually stoic Uchiha barely restraining himself. Of all the members of Sigma, Sasuke had been the one who had approved of Naruto's actions the most. The raven-haired Anbu member had seen enough slaughter in his short lifetime, and he had had his fill of watching the defenseless and innocent being cut down by those stronger and more skilled. For Sasuke, anybody who would intervene and stop a massacre from happening was somebody who should be respected. I am, Hokage-sama, Naruto replied curtly. Sarutobi nodded heavily, as if expecting the answer. The atmosphere of the office was tense and even Naruto swallowed heavily as the Hokage deliberated on exactly what his fate would be. The retribution that came was quick, sudden, and unexpected. Moron! Sarutobi thundered. His arm moved as a blur and before Naruto could react, a thick, heavy tome had slammed into his head and sent him toppling backwards to the ground. The rest of Team Sigma flinched, Daichi and Yuka taking a step back as the Hokage towered over his desk, leaning forward to eye Naruto on the ground. Don't start wars, you idiot. Sarutobi's voice resounded throughout the office. His annoyance was plain on his face. If you want to start a war, step up and take my robes. Then you can do whatever you want. Until then, stop it. Really? Naruto groaned as he sat up off of the ground. He rubbed his face gingerly, silently thanking the headband that had absorbed a lot of the blow. The face again. There's nothing worthwhile about it, Sarutobi grumbled as he sat back down in his seat. He signed something and rolled it up. If I threw it at your arms or legs, you wouldn't be able to complete your week's allotment of administrative duties. That's my face you're talking about, Naruto muttered sourly as he stood up. Like I said, nothing worthwhile, Sarutobi repeated. Naruto's face twitched, but he held it in. A week of admin duties, then? He asked quietly. And I'm docking your pay, Sarutobi continued. He shuffled his papers. It will be sent with our formal letter of apology to the village hidden in mist. Naruto could accept that he barely used his money in the first place. He much of it left anyway, most of it being spent on retrieving Tsunade many months ago, but after the failed revolution and the slew of missions his team had done in the last couple of months, his balance was back up to where it used to be. Hokage-sama, somebody interjected. The Hokage's eyebrows raised as Sasuke took a step forward, his eyes intent. Why don't we do something about Kiri? How can we let that happen? The Hokage sighed, looking quite old. Nobody has ever taken the land of water, he explained kindly. Nobody. It's an archipelago made up of 1,000 islands, some large, many small, all enough to conduct insurgency operations. We'd need twice the forces we have now to even consider it, and while we could take it, we could never hold it. Sasuke looked like he was going to protest, but the Hokage raised a hand, stalling him. I understand, Sasuke, he said, and he sounded like he truly did. However, to take on Kirigakure, we'd have to move forces away from our other borders. We'd leave them vulnerable, and our neighbors would take advantage of that. If we tried, what is happening over there would happen here, to our citizens and our families. It's a tragedy, but sadly, there's nothing we can do. Sasuke looked mulish, and the Hokage paused. Then, the corners of his lips twitched and he leaned forward. Nothing officially, of course, he concluded. Sasuke still looked troubled, but he bowed his head and moved back into formation. Now, Team Sigma, the Hokage continued, his voice much cheerier than before. I expect you all to be here at 0700 sharp. You've got a lot of work to do. They truly did. There was still a lot of paperwork flying through the office from the failed revolution. Audits were being carried out at every significant village and town. Personnel reviews and mission reports were being examined and filed for later analysis. Budgets were being discussed, patrol routes changed, and lots of other very little tasks that built up into there being a lot of paper to shuffle. Most of the decision-making was done before the reports arrived at the Hokage's office. That was what the various departments were for. Nonetheless, the Hokage liked to review many of them before they were filed, and so they were forwarded to him. He read some of them, made adjustments to a few others and just plain ignored the rest. As the old, gray-haired man sat at his desk, Team Sigma darted in and around him. They collected reports, sent off messengers, sorted out archive boxes and escorted them to the records department. It was a never-ending cycle, and the paperwork never seemed to stop. Our annual budget from the fire court is being announced next week, Sarutobi informed them during a lull in the work. We need to make sure we're on top of things before it makes the work that comes after that much easier. Now, stop lazing about and get to work. This wasn't quite what I was expecting when I was drafted into the Hokage's personal guard, Toa muttered to Daichi as they lifted up a stack of boxes and began to leave the office. Get used to it, the Hyuga said with good humor. We might be doing this for a while. Toa made a noise of annoyance as the two Anbu disappeared. Naruto just went about his duty as normal. This was nothing new to him, and he'd been doing this sort of work for years. If there was a decision that needed to be made and the Hokage was unavailable or busy, Naruto would often make it on his behalf. It was one of the technical powers behind his position as the Hokage's representative, and if the Hokage didn't like it then Naruto would be sure to hear about it, but it usually ended up being the correct decision. After all of the years spent in Sarutobi's service, he had gotten used to the way the man thought, and he understood a lot of the reasoning and thought processes behind the decisions. When he wasn't making village-wide decisions, Naruto was helping his squad grow accustomed to the heavy load of work they were doing. In many ways, it was more exhausting than combat training. Komaki, usually level-headed except when Toa was involved, almost shredded a filing cabinet with her wire before Naruto was able to help her sort through it. Daichi and Yuka never seemed to be in the office long as Naruto kept them busy running messages, picking up packages and scrolls, and escorting the administrative stuff to the records department. In many ways, the young blonde was in his element. It was little wonder one afternoon that the office was still running smoothly even as the Hokage napped behind his desk. Triplicate that, Naruto ordered Sasuke, who held a piece of offending paperwork looking befuddled. Use the stamp here, and then send one copy to the archives, one to intelligence, and file one on the third floor. Got it? Sure. Sasuke said, sounding anything but. He sighed tiredly. You seem to know exactly what you're doing. Me, I can barely get my head around this. Naruto smiled wryly. I've been doing this for years, he responded dryly. 7 long years. He shrugged. You get used to it. We can tell, Sasuke commented. You're practically running the village up here. I mean, the Hokage hasn't really done anything in the last 2 days. Naruto waved it off. He's too lazy, he said sourly. Why do it yourself when you can have your elite Anbu guard do it for you? The lazy old, he trailed off, frowning. A messenger had just entered the room. Naruto gestured him over and took a scroll from him. He scanned it, his eyebrows rising as he read the contents. Okay, That's way above my pay grade, Naruto muttered. He turned to the desk, where the Hokage had just opened his eyes, and passed along the message. The Hokage took it and read it. After considering it for a minute, he nodded at Naruto, who turned back to the messenger. Send him in, Naruto instructed. Yes, sir. A few moments later, a nervous-looking man was escorted into the room. He was thin and reedy, wearing spectacles and the thick furred robes generally popular with the Lightning Court, the feudal court of the Land of Lightning. Sarutobi sat behind his desk patiently as the man approached him, while the rest of Team Sigma continued to work quietly around the room. The man squared his shoulders and cleared his throat. I wish you good tidings, Hokage-sama, he began with a surprisingly deep and expressive voice. He gave a deep, respectful bow. I am Kobayashi Abe, messenger and representative of the Lightning Lord. Yes, the Hokage interrupted politely. He smiled. I have heard of you. Ah, yes, Abe continued, a flitter of disconcertion passing over his face. He straightened. I come on behalf of my lord with an unusual request. Know that you will be extremely well compensated for any troubles that you encounter. The Lightning Lord will remember your steadfastness and commitment to the mission, and assuredly reward you such. Should you take up our quest, you can name your reward within reason, of course. The Hokage tilted his head in an indication of slight interest, while Naruto looked up from the scroll he was reading curiously. Oh, my, Sarutobi chuckled quietly. He rubbed his hands together. This must be an extremely unusual request. I don't often have representatives of the feudal courts promising anything and everything. Tell me, he said to Abe, what service does the Lightning Lord wish to hire Konoha, and why has he not gone to his own hidden village? Abe smiled wryly. The fourth Raikage would not authorize the mission, he replied. Too much chance of a diplomatic incident occurring, I believe he said. Nonetheless, the Lightning Lord feels quite strongly, and he has chosen to come to the strongest village in the elemental countries, he gestured with his hand. Here. Naruto was a little surprised at that. While the feudal lord had no direct authority over the assignments that hidden villages may take, generally speaking, mission requests from the feudal court weren't turned down. To keep the relationship between the feudal lord and the hidden village running smoothly, it was best to accept the jobs, provided they would not place the village in danger. If the fourth Raikage had refused, there must have been a good reason for it. What does the Lightning Lord want done? Sarutobi asked quietly. Abe took a deep breath. The Lightning Lord's favored nephew has gone missing, he informed the old man. He kept a personal correspondence with him, and while my lord did not approve of his nephew's lifestyle, he respected the decision. Now, however, that correspondence has stopped. There has been no contact for many months, and the Lightning Lord is worried. He wishes you to investigate the matter and retrieve Kubota Masaso, his nephew. It all sounded rather straightforward. What had the Raikage been worrying about? I see, the third Hokage replied. He paused for a moment, his eyes distant in thought. Then, his lips twitched in what may have been a rueful smile. I assume the Masaso, last known location was somewhere politically inconvenient. You could say that, Abe answered. 8 years ago, he was assigned to the feudal court of the Land of Water as our ambassador. When the civil war began, the borders closed, but the Water Lord still retained much of his power and kept the courts running. Masaso chose to stay, he struggled to continue. He was always a soft man. He held a lot of sympathy for the disadvantaged. He felt he could help more there than back home. Our intelligence indicates that the water court fell over 3 years ago, Sarutobi replied. He gave Abe a steady look. The Water Lord was slain, most of his family butchered, and the nobility scattered. Masaso escaped the purge, Abe answered. He got involved with the resistance, and he helped them run the Underground Railroad, a series of safe houses and passages used to help people escape the Mizukage's regime. He helped them forge appropriate papers, drew from his personal funds to set refugees up with houses, clothing, jobs. Abe paused. He is a good man, Hokage-sama, he continued earnestly. Sarutobi sighed. Yes, so it seems, he murmured. In the corner, pretending he wasn't listening, Naruto felt a jolt of surprise at that. He hadn't known that Konoha knew a lot about what was going on in the Land of Water. It was closed up tight, and very little ever escaped. His fingers twitched as he recalled the events of last week at the wall. No, not much got out of that hellhole at all. Masaso did mention that the resistance was being outfitted with supplies, and unmarked shinobi have worked with resistance agents to run operations against the regime, Abe said. The Lightning Lord knew it was not Kumo, however, the village who had been running such operations would have a means to infiltrate and operate beyond the borders. Sarutobi's head shot up sharply, his eyes suddenly hard and unforgiving. Konoha's official position on the situation in the Land of Water clearly states our non-involvement in the matter, he rebuked quietly, but sternly. It would be best if you remembered that. Unfounded rumors and idle speculation will not help your cause. Forgive me. Abe bowed, deeper and lower than before. I know not where the resistance gets their help from. I apologize for whatever assumptions I have made. Good. Sarutobi accepted the apology. He stroked his goatee. Your request is quite troubling. There are few who would be willing or able to accept such a mission. The payment would be significant, Abe answered firmly. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a sealed scroll. Sarutobi eyed it and Naruto took it as a cue to move. He placed down his book and walked over to the ambassador. Taking the scroll, and noting the sealed emblem of the lighting court, he passed it on to the Hokage, who took it carefully. The seal flashed with an orange light and the scroll unraveled. Sarutobi began reading it, and whatever he was reading was enough to make him look distinctly startled. The Lightning Lord loves his nephew, and payment will come out of his personal accounts, Abe continued passionately. He gestured at the scroll. The amount listed in there is enough to fund your village for the next 6 months. The land holdings are yours to do with as you wish, sell them, rent them, use them, he cares not. A 64% increase in job delegation for your village with wages paid 10% above what we pay Kumo. The rewards my lord offers you are significant. It truly is, Sarutobi murmured. He seemed deep in thought, and Naruto was sure that his eyes flickered towards him for a split second. He leaned back in his chair. Allow me some time to consider your proposal. Of course, Hokage-sama, Abe replied, and he bowed deeply. May this be the start of a friendship between the village hidden in leaves and the Lightning Court. He left the room, leaving the Hokage and Team Sigma alone. The Hokage took a deep breath and turned his head to stare at Naruto. Naruto stared back. Deep within the Department of Intelligence, there was a room. It was a room that most shinobi didn't know existed, a room where operations and missions of the strictest secrecy were planned out. Aides, messengers, and assistants, anybody not relevant to the running and planning of the mission, were kept out. It was within that room that Team Sigma stood around a table, staring down at the large map of the Land of Water. At the head of the table, Nara Shikaku was rummaging through some notes. The Hokage sat in his chair, listening carefully, as 4 members of the Department of Intelligence darted around the room, passing out briefs, placing pins on the map and generally looking quite busy. Team Sigma, the Hokage began. He puffed on his pipe, blowing a cloud of smoke into the air, and leveled a steady look at them. The mission you are about to undertake is dangerous. It is also off the books. He paused, staring at every member of the team. You will be outfitted with suicide capsules. They will be inserted in your teeth. Should you be captured, it is expected that you will protect Konoha's interests to your last breath. Your team leader will also have access to a remote technique that will deploy the neurotoxins to your bloodstream should you be unable to. Team Sigma was motionless, although beads of sweat ran down Sasuke's head, and Toa's hands were clenched. If you do not wish to participate, now is your chance, Sarutobi continued. He gestured to the door. Leave. Nothing will be said. Nothing will be noted. You cannot go into this half-heartedly. If you stay, I expect your full commitment. You have 10 seconds to decide. Naruto felt like a block of lead had fallen into the pit his stomach. He had gone on dangerous missions before, and he had fought dangerous enemies. However, he had never been grilled like this for any of the operations he had participated in. Granted, a lot of them might have been just as dangerous as this one, but they had been a matter of village security, whereas this was just a mission from a client, granted, a well-connected and powerful client. He clenched his fists, steadied his nerves and stayed still. So did the rest of Team Sigma. Sarutobi gave a faint smile. As expected of my personal Anbu, he said with an air of satisfaction. He turned and nodded at Shikaku. Begin. This mission will now be referred to as Operation Hurricane, Shikaku began in his gravelly voice. His scarred face was illuminated by the fluorescent lights above them, and he gestured down at the map. This is an S-ranked operation on a need-to-know basis. Whatever facts you learn in this room stay with you. Disclosure of any information that may come up in the planning and commencement of this operation is a capital offense. Do you understand? Many of Team Sigma nodded. It was sometimes surprising for Naruto to see his usually loud and antic-filled squad act so professional, but they were an Anbu team, and even Toa and Komaki could drop the act when needed. This is what we know about the Land of Water's current situation. Shikaku pointed at the map. The 4th Mizukage has implemented martial law. His academies are churning out shinobi by the hundreds, and most of them are unskilled and barely trained. Nonetheless, he's managed to forcibly occupy every major and minor city and town on the map. His personal guard, Kirigaku's, Tide, implement his policies without hesitation. If you cross the Mizukage, you and your family disappear. He pointed at the numerous red dots and pins on the map. These indicate strongholds or significant portions of Kiri's army, the Nara continued. They occupy most of the territory from there. Each major region has a local commander, and they enforce the force policies in that region. Dozens of towns will fall under that commander's purview. Now, the blue pins. He gestured at the scattered few blue pins. There weren't very many of them at all when compared to the red pins. This is what we know about resistance activity. They operate in small isolated cells. The resistance has fewer numbers, but they make up for their lack of numbers with skill. There's at least 15 former Jonin, according to Kiri's latest bingo book, and they all seem to take orders from a woman named Terumi Mei. Fuzzy photos of a striking red-haired woman were passed around. She's apparently gone up against Yagura and held her ground, Shikaku told them. She's definitely their most powerful asset and one. He paused, quickly glancing at the Hokage, but the old man merely nodded. And one we've worked with before. So, Abe had been correct. It had been Konoha running Black Ops into the Land of Water. The package was last seen here, Shikaku continued. He pointed at a small black pin, a village or town under the Mizukage's control but without a significant shinobi presence. Contact between the package and his uncle stopped 4 months ago. We don't have any more recent intelligence. Our operatives were pulled out of there to help deal with the Jashin incident. There was a knock at the door and the Hokage looked up. Enter, he called. A man walked in. Lean, of average height and sporting a close crop, he looked utterly unremarkable in any way possible. He saluted and walked forward, coming to stand next to Naruto at the table. This is Rat, Sarutobi said. He will be your guide and local expert to the region. Rat took Naruto's hand and shook it. His grip was firm, but as they shook, Naruto noticed that nothing flickered behind those dead eyes. What division are you from? Naruto asked curiously. Rat titled his head. Classified, he replied flatly. For a moment, Naruto thought he was annoyed, but then as he continued the blonde Anbu realized that that was the way he always sounded. Your security clearance isn't high enough. That was interesting. As part of his duties as the Hokage's aide, Naruto's security clearance was one of the highest in the village, or so had thought. It needed to be, given the level of information that was available to him and some of the errands and village-wide decisions that he made on behalf of the Hokage. Apparently, it wasn't as high as he thought. What's your experience? Cage asked from the other side of the table. The oldest member of Team Sigma was sizing Rat up. Rat turned to look at him blankly. I have led small teams of operatives in and out of the Land of Water for the last 5 years, he replied. Operations included intelligence gathering, asset acquisition, retrieval, interrogation and assassination. We assisted local resistance forces at times, and worked independently at others. Rat will be assigned to your squad, Shikaku told Naruto. You have operational command, but I highly advise you listen when he speaks. Naruto nodded. How will we get in? He asked. Rat took over. Kiri whaling boats use these waters here. He pointed at the map, a few hundred kilometers off of the coast of the Land of Waves. Intelligence suggests that one of these boats is already in the area, and will be leaving in approximately 48 hours. We will deploy from here, he pointed at a small inlet in the Land of Waves, and intercept the boat. We will attach ourselves to the hull, wait 7.5 hours, and then detach ourselves. We should be approximately here. Where he pointed to was north of one of the larger regions in the Land of Water, surrounded by a chain of smaller islands. There were several red pins placed on the map, quite a few black pins, 3 blue pins, and a golden pin at the edge of the coast. It was that gold pin that Rat referred to next. This is the asset's last known location, Rat continued dully. Yosibo is a small fishing village. Population does not exceed 200. From there, we may be able to rendezvous with local resistance forces and find the mission priority. Naruto nodded. He turned to look at Sasuke. Have you had underwater training yet? He asked. Sasuke shook his head. You've got 12 hours, Naruto told him seriously. Better use that Sharingan of yours, we're leaving in 18 hours. He turned to the Hokage and bowed his head. Hokage-sama, Team Sigma accepts the mission. With your permission, we'll begin preparations. Dismissed, the Hokage commanded. As Team Sigma began to file out, he spoke up again. Naruto. The Uzumaki stopped. It is vitally important that your cover is not blown, the Hokage warned. His face was serious, and he leaned forward intently. However, your survival comes before your cover. Only under the direst of circumstances may you use the chakra of the nine-tailed demon fox. Do you understand? Yes, Hokage-sama, Naruto agreed. Sarutobi leaned back. Then prepare, he said. Operation Hurricane is a go. Operation Hurricane began the very next night at 11 in the evening. Operative Rat had already departed the night before and would meet the rest of the team at the rendezvous point. Departing from a discreet gate, Team Sigma headed east towards the land of waves. The nation had always been a quiet, rather dull place. Since the fall of the nearby village hidden in whirlpools, it had rarely been involved in international events. The most notable thing to happen in the last 10 years was the corporate magnate Gato's attempted takeover of the island nation. Kakashi and his Genin team had been there, and it had ended with the missing nin they had been fighting fleeing from the battle after being double-crossed by Gato. Not 1 month later, Gato's mangled corpse had been found hanging outside his private yacht. One does not betray an A-rank shinobi without reaping the consequences. Since then, things had turned relatively peaceful for the land of waves. A new bridge had been constructed revitalizing trade to the area, and the influx of merchants and traders to the area had brought a degree of shinobi presence to the region, scaring away many of the mercenaries and other unsavory characters that had lingered since Gato's fall. Team Sigma encountered none of them as they traveled quickly unpopulated regions of the tiny nation. Above them, the clouds flashed with light, and a second later a crack of thunder pealed through the air. The downpour was torrential and the storm obscured the moon and stars in the night sky. Visibility was poor, but with Daichi in the lead, it was a moot point. They continued traveling until the head reached the coast, arriving at the top of a steep, rocky bluff. Daichi paused, and his fingers twitched. Contact, lights visible, outside Byakugan range, the Hyuga signed. Naruto came to stand behind him while the others took a loose defensive formation around them. They all crouched down in the mud, reducing their profile against the horizon, the rain slamming down on them. Their thick, black Anbu cloaks shielded them from the worst of it, and the tight, black bodysuits they wore underneath kept them relatively warm. Naruto reached into his cloak with a gloved hand and pulled out a set of binoculars. He peered through them. A set of lights glimmered faintly in the distance, bobbing up and down and often disappearing behind the swell of a wave. The sound of the ocean around them was deafening, the waves slamming against the rocky beach below, and Naruto could practically taste the salt in the air. He lowered the binoculars and gestured to Komaki. The slender Jonin pulled out a large, waterproof map. Naruto eyed it carefully, looking at the scrawled annotations written on it and comparing it to the lights he could see in the distance. They matched, and his lips thinned behind his mask. Operation is a go, begin phase 2, Naruto signed. Then, he took a deep breath, backed up a little, and ran towards the cliff. His teammates followed him as they jumped over the edge of the bluff. The slope was steep, but the Anbu team scaled down it quite easily with the minor application of chakra. The closer they got to the beach, the louder the waves became, and in a few moments, they were all perched on a large, sharp-edged slippery rock. The water around them surged back and forth, white spray whipping up splashing against them even as the storm rumbled up ahead. Naruto reached into his robes and pulled out a small rebreather attachment. He fiddled with the straps, adjusting it as he slipped it around his head and placed it over his mask. With a small click, the rebreather settled in place and suddenly his breathing changed. The smell of salt and seaweed almost disappeared completely. Naruto adjusted his rebreather one more time and then turned to Yuka, who had just done the same as well. They checked each other's equipment and then waited for the rest of the team. Daichi, take point, everybody clip on. We go in 30. They all nodded and reached for their waist. A tight belt was wrapped around each of them, surrounded by hooks and clips. Daichi reached into his robes, pulling out a large coil of black rope, and clipped the end onto his belt. He passed it to Naruto, who ran it through his belt, clipping it on and passing it to Yuka. In a few moments, all of Team Sigma was connected by a long 30-meter rope. Naruto tugged on his, checking it, and then nodded to Daichi. The Hyuga gave it 3 sharp tugs, nodded, and then began wading out into the water. Naruto followed, suppressing a wince as his lower half was covered in a cold, icy sensation. His waterproof boots and bodysuit kept the water out, but it would take a while to adjust to the chilly temperature of the ocean. The waves tried to push him back, but he fought against it. Daichi kept wading out further and further, the rest of Team Sigma following, stopping when his head was barely above the water. Then, he placed up his hand and began counting down. When he reached 0, as 1, Team Sigma disappeared underneath the surface of the ocean. They did not resurface. The journey to their target took half an hour. They couldn't risk using lights or being spotted, for it was very likely that there was a shinobi on board the ship. The Mizukage wouldn't let the crew leave the land of water without some kind of guard. However, with Daichi at point, all the rest of the team had to do was swim. Daichi and the rope would guide them in the right direction. They swam close to the sea floor, almost 20 meters deep, using subtle chakra techniques to adjust their bodies to the different pressures. The water around them was completely dark, and there was no light emanating from anything. It was hard to tell exactly what direction they were swimming, guided only by the gentle tugs on the rope. Occasionally he would hear a scraping noise off in the distance, and Naruto felt something brush past him as he swam in the water. Other than that, it was fairly relaxing. That is until they got closer to the vessel. A mournful howl echoed in the water all around them. It was low and deep, going into Naruto's very bones. A second call followed, something a little more high-pitched, and then Naruto felt a tug on his rope pulling him up. He followed, kicking behind him as they rose up from the bottom of the sea. They had to pause after a time, their hands slowing, contorting into seals as they depressurized their bodies, and then they continued. As they swam up, Naruto saw lights blinking in the distance. They were nearing the surface of the ocean, and light was beginning to appear in the murky depths. A low, humming noise surrounded them, the engines of a boat, and it grew louder and louder until it was almost deafening. Sudden movement caught his eye, and Naruto turned around to see something big and dark push through the water. As he rose, he saw the outline of a whale, thin cables and cords tugging at it, pulling it back towards the surface. At one point, the team was swimming through an inky, black substance, and Naruto abruptly realized it was whale blood. Daichi continued on, slowing down as they neared the keel of the ship. The hull was dark and covered in barnacles. Team Sigma rose up and grabbed hold of whatever they could. Daichi reached into his cloak and Naruto followed suit, pulling out a small, rubber handle. He stuck it on the hull, letting its adhesive surface stick to the metal, and then tugged at it. It stayed strong, and Naruto took a deep breath through his rebreather and relaxed. As the rest of the team around him secured their spots on the vessel, Naruto settled himself against the hull of the ship and tried to make himself comfortable. Phase 3 was now in effect. It was going to be a long trip. It was early in the morning when Shimura Danzo entered the Hokage's office. Unlike most rooms in the building, this one was still brightly lit. The old, crippled man entered, his wooden cane tapping against the floorboards. Hiruzen didn't give any indication that he had heard his old friend and just kept reading through the paperwork on his desk. It was much messier than usual, filled with maps, intelligence reports and profiles on notable Kirinin. "I see you're still working hard," Danzo said evenly. He came to rest at the other end of the Hokage's desk and sat down with a slight groan, giving a weary sigh once he was fully seated. "I'm surprised you took the mission. It was too good of an opportunity to pass," Hiruzen responded quietly, head still down over a bundle of paper. "There are easier ways to gain influence in the Lightning Court," Danzo reflected. He eyes his one-time rival carefully. "Ways that do not include endangering Konoha's Jinchuriki. You must understand me, old friend," Hiruzen rebuked. He placed the piece of paper down on the desk and rubbed his eyes. "This mission is exactly what Naruto needs to continue his development." "Oh." Danzo cocked his head. "How interesting." Hiruzen smiled thinly. "Naruto's heart has weakened," he said, and there was a trace of something like sadness in his tone. "His will of fire burns less bright. In many ways, I believe he has forgotten exactly what it is that he fights for. The land of water will be a good opportunity for him too. He paused. Reflect on exactly why we do the things we need to do. Danzo was still, his face expressionless behind his bandages. I wasn't aware that there were morale concerns, he said after a few moments. That is a concern. The entire incident affected him in more ways than one, Hiruzen answered. He took a deep breath and released it as a soft sigh. The brutality was something he could handle, but I believe that empathized with the false Jinchuriki. Their fates saddened him. A waste of life, Danzo snorted. An interesting premise, yes, but ultimately a waste. To house that much demonic chakra indicates strength. I wonder, had we gotten to them first, what kind of shinobi those children could have become. He fixed a piercing look at the third Hokage. The border incident was that to your design as well. Hiruzen nodded. Your informants do you credit, he answered quietly. The refugees appeared exactly when they were meant to. Naruto's response, however. Short-sighted, Danzo grunted. He moved his cane and adjusted his leg. It demonstrated a clear lack of reason. He frowned. His emotional stability is compromised. We did that, friend, Hiruzen answered, shaking his head. In our attempts to mold him, we damaged his psyche. Did you know he can produce Kushina's chains? There was a flicker in Danzo's eyes, and for a moment he looked briefly taken aback. How interesting, the old man mused. The Hokage's smile was brittle. Because of Naruto's emotional conditioning, they have been, he paused, humming, damaged, for lack of a better word. Combined with some interesting side effects from the nine-tailed chakra, they may represent a problem. The two men sat in silence for a few minutes, each wizened shinobi thinking quite carefully. Uzumaki Naruto was the product of years of careful training and exposure to the outside world. Most of it was going as planned, and Naruto's infamy continued to grow as expected. Will it affect the plan? Danzo asked after some time. Do we need to? What? Hiruzen interrupted, sounding slightly incredulous. Abandon the plan. Leave him out on the gutter. Put him down. He gave a short, sharp laugh. No, I will continue on as planned. He's already so far along. His administration and communication skills are excellent. He runs half the village already. His combat skills are excellent. I can count on one hand the number of shinobi that could come close to that level of strength at his age. He rubbed his goatee. No, I will continue as necessary, Hiruzen said firmly. 5 years is all that it will take. In 5 years, the village would have its 5th Hokage, and possibly its most powerful yet. Unless he gets cut down by a Kirinin in the meantime, Danzo added dryly. He tapped his cane against the floor in a rhythmic pattern. He needs to experience the world. Hiruzen was unrepentant. Intellectually, he understands the rationale behind making tough decisions, of being ruthless and brutal. Emotionally, he needs to catch up. It will be good for him. Danzo nodded, accepting his Hokage's reasoning. There is the other matter, he said after a few moments. He gave Hiruzen a significant look. He won't be happy. He doesn't have to be happy, Hiruzen retorted sharply. Itachi sent the boy down this path, a path that Sasuke is all too happy to follow. It may do Sasuke some good also to see why sometimes the hard decisions have to be made. Danzo's lips twitched. Very well, he acquiesced. We shall see how this turns out. Hiruzen hummed, but did not comment, and he did his best to hide the trembling of his hand. He stared at it as he tried to force it under control, but even when Danzo stood and left, it was still trembling. 5 years, he reminded himself. After 50 years, it was nearly nothing. Just a little longer. The trip into the land of water was extremely boring. Attached to the bottom of the hull of a large whaling ship, there was absolutely nothing for Naruto to do. It had already been several hours according to his internal body clock, and he had spent the most of them sleeping restlessly as best he could. He had only woken when the tug on his rope indicated that it was his turn to keep watch, and he had kept his eyes on the surface of the water. The brilliant spotlights mounted on the vessel had kept its focus on the whale while it was being dragged in, and then they had been turned off and the ship had turned around. From what he could tell, the rain had lessened as they had moved further away from the coast of the land of waves, although the occasional flash of lightning could still be seen flashing above the surface of the water. The engines were quite loud, and if he listened carefully, he could even hear the shouts and hollers of the crew as they began to cut up the whale. Phase 4 was dependent on a pre-arranged signal from one of the crew. Naruto had no idea who it was, but from what he could tell, the person was bribed to give the signal on every single voyage, regardless if anybody was there or not. After several hours, he was glad to hear it when it came. A loud, clanging noise erupted near Naruto's head. He jerked back in surprise, his heart hitching for a second. A second bang came next, then a third, and then it fell silent. Naruto rolled his eyes behind his mask, and tugged 3 times on the rope. He took the handle off of the hull of the ship, placed it in his cloak and then, after feeling a huge tug, jumped off. Almost immediately, the dark hull of the vessel broke away from him, continuing to chug towards one of the land of water's largest ports. He caught a brief glimpse of the whirring propeller blades before Daichi led the team deeper into the ocean and the surface of the water grew more and more distant. The next leg of the journey was half as long as the hitchhike on the ship had. Daichi carefully led them through a series of large trenches on the ocean floor, illuminating the area around them by a small but powerful torch. They moved slowly and kept their chakra expenditure to a minimum, being close enough nearby landmasses to be picked up by a particularly skilled tracker. It was a tiring and exhausting journey, and the entire team was thankful as Daichi led them past the ocean trenches and up towards the surface. They emerged from the ocean on a small, deserted island, more of a series of rocky outcrops and dead reefs than anything else. As the team dragged themselves to the surface of the water and onto hard land, they dropped to the ground, panting. Daichi in particular, with the extended use of his bloodline, lay exhausted on the ground. Perimeter established. No hostiles detected, Cage signed. A couple of crows cawed as they flew overhead. Rest up, Naruto ordered, keeping the fatigue out of his voice. He cleared his throat. We'll stay here for half an hour, and then we're moving out. The team took the chance to rest. Team Sigma, and most of Konoha's shinobi, weren't used to conducting underwater operations. While they could bound across the land of fire's abundant forests with relative ease, the long underwater swim had been much more taxing. Komaki and Yuka lay next to each other, masks off and their faces turned towards the night sky. Daichi was actually sleeping, body splayed out on the rocks, while Toa was on the other side of the small island, relieving himself in the water. Sasuke had his back up against a rock, frantically eating ration bar, while Cage chewed methodically on his, surveying the map in front of him. Naruto made his way to him, already feeling a lot of his weariness fade. How are we? He asked the older shinobi quietly. On track, Cage responded. He gestured at a tiny smudge on the map. We're here. If we swim 284 kilometers towards here, and he moved his finger on the map, then we'll hit a sandbar. We move southeast from there, have a short break, and continue on south until we arrive at Alpha target before daybreak. Naruto nodded, hearing the information he already knew. It was relaxing to go over the facts, to know that every facet of the mission had been meticulously planned by people way smarter than he was. This clandestine operation was the most sensitive mission he had ever been on, and they couldn't afford any stuff-ups. Take a break, Cage. I'll take watch, Naruto offered. Cage blinked, and then nodded gratefully. He rose up, bowed his head at Naruto, and moved back to the others to take a rest, still chewing on his ration bar. Naruto stood guard at the tallest rock on the outcrop, arms folded. Phase 3 of their mission had finished, but there were a great many phases left. Team Sigma continued to use nightfall to their advantage, and after their short break with their rebreathers full, they slipped back underwater. Daichi continued to take point, leading them to a depth of 30 meters and pushing forward. Unless an enemy sensor was right on top of them, it would be almost impossible for them to be spotted, but Naruto wasn't taking any chances. The lights remained off and the team continued to use the rope to guide them in the right direction. It was an hour and a half in their journey when the first unexpected incident occurred. The water around them was dark, but when Daichi tugged twice on the rope, signaling an enemy contact, Naruto was certain he could see what the Hyuga was talking about. Rising from the sea depths was something sinewy and large, blacker than the darkness around them. There was a brushing motion around him, the water surging past, and he suddenly caught a glimpse of something scaly and long as it shot past. Something snapped by his head and Naruto jerked back, barely avoiding a pair of jaws the size of his body from taking him out. His fingers sped through the water, forming seals. Water style. Water bullet technique. His grasp of water techniques had greatly improved over the months, but even the greenest genin would have been able to form a powerful technique surrounded by this much water. Concussive bullets of compressed water shot out from his mouth, rapidly dissipating and losing power as they bled off into the ocean, but it was still powerful enough to strike the creature. It reared back, and a terrible screech reverberated around them. Somebody came into view in the dim, murky water. Cage floated there, holding something that looked like a slingshot in his hands. He pulled back at the contraption and released it, and a something shot out from the end. It struck the creature in the hide, and then there was a fizzing bright yellow glow. The spiked flare lay embedded in a gigantic sea serpent, the size of a small building. It lay coiled up on the seabed, half its body rising up to snap at them. Small oozy rivets floated from several puncture wounds in its side, but it looked relatively unharmed and quite annoyed. Scatter and engage, Naruto signed in the light of the flare. He detached himself from the rope and used chakra in the soles of his feet to propel himself down, avoiding the sea serpent as its head rolled through the water. Toa was a tad slower, and he took the blow to his chest, one arm raised to block it. He was sent spinning in the water, and Komaki shot after him in a burst of speed. The rest of the team moved to engage the serpent. It was quite difficult. Their projectile weapons, save for cages, were quite impractical, and a lot of the destructive techniques were useless underneath the water. Naruto flipped through some seals, finished on Monkey, and threw out his arms. The water around him surged, and bubbles exploded all around him. Giant, invisible blades of wind exploded from his tenketsu, shotting at the serpent. They left visible trails in the water and sliced open the serpent's hide. The serpent screamed again, thrashing around, even as Cage lobbed another projectile at it. It sunk into the serpent's head and exploded. The explosion didn't produce any fire or smoke. Rather, a rippling orb of pressure expanded from the epicenter, tearing through the creature with devastating effect. It struck the shinobi some distance away, and Naruto grunted as he was buffeted by the powerful forces. He gathered himself, gestured to Yuka and Sasuke, and then dove down at the creature. While wounded, it was still capable of fighting. The blood and torn flesh floated around it, slowly rising to the surface or diffusing in the water. Naruto used burst of chakra to quickly propel through the water. As the serpent came at Yuka beside him, he saw her throw her hand out and expend chakra through it. The recoil sent her sliding sideways through the water, avoiding the strike. Sasuke and Naruto kept diving, coming closer to the serpent, and the blonde reached into his vest and pulled out his senbon and a reel of explosive tags. The special underwater variant were insanely expensive and almost useless to use on the surface, but stuck on the end of senbon, they would do the job down here. He swam around the creature with a fistful of senbon, jabbing them into the creature one after the other, while Sasuke did the same on the other side of the serpent. After a few moments, Naruto kicked up. The Jinchuriki saw that Sasuke was following him, and as Cage and Yuka continued to keep the beast, Naruto flipped around in the water and made a single-hand seal. Detonate. A series of concussive blasts erupted from all over the serpent's reared-up head and neck. The water frothed and wreathed, and the pressure that lashed out at the surrounding shinobi was enough to pushing them several meters backwards. The sea serpent didn't screech or howl. The explosions had instantly killed it, and its bloodied, mangled corpse slowly began to fall back onto the seabed below. The light emanating from the brightly glowing flare dimmed as it went. Resume journey, Naruto signed in the dying light. He grabbed the floating rope and attached himself to it again. Once everybody was back on the rope, Cage made a hand seal and the light below them died. Once again, they were back to swimming in the darkness. The rest of the journey went smoothly, and before long they had arrived close to their destination. They slunk out of the water very carefully, Daichi and Cage lying down partially submerged on the beach as they surveyed the area. Naruto and the others waited further back, their heads bobbing up and down on the gentle swell of the waves, until Cage raised a hand signaling the all okay. They quickly climbed out of the water, surfacing at a small, unoccupied inlet relatively close to Alpha Target. At the end of the inlet, hidden behind some bushy plants, was a small cave entrance. Inside, Operative Rat waited for them patiently. Dim lights lit up the area, revealing stacks of crates, sacks and a couple of hammocks placed up against one of the walls. Water dripped from somewhere, echoing out in the caves at a continuous, quite irritating rate. Naruto detached his rebreather and placed it in his cloak. He nodded at the other operative as the rest of his team filed in cave. Toa was walking gingerly, supporting by Komaki, who gently led him to one of the hammocks. A few moments later, a green glow lit up the cave as the team medic began to heal her companion. "You're 7 minutes late," Rat observed tonelessly. "We ran into the local marine life," Naruto answered. "Irrelevant," Rat answered. He turned to a nearby overturned crate and the documents that had been placed on them. "We will need to cut your break 7 minutes short if we are to arrive at the designated target on time." Both Sasuke and Yuka, rebreathers and masks off, looked pained. "Understood," Naruto replied after a moment. "We'll leave in 33 minutes. He didn't like it, but he understood where the apparently emotionless agent was coming from. They were running on a tight schedule and couldn't afford any delays. As the rest of Team Sigma rested and ate, Naruto sidled up to Rat. "Have you scouted the target?" Naruto asked. Rat shook his head. "No," he responded. "I only arrived here an hour and a half ago. My contact had gone into hiding, and it took me some time to locate his safe house." He passed on some documents to Naruto. "Local passports for all of us, citizen registration, and other relevant documents." Naruto took them and eyed them. "How good are they?" "They will not pass an official investigation," Rat answered. "However, they should pass a random spot check if needed." "Right," Naruto said. He began handing out the forged papers. "We'll leave in 30 minutes. Hopefully we be in and out in 15 minutes. They left the small cave and began to travel to the other side of the island. Although it was a relatively short journey, they took their time, being very careful to keep a good eye on their surroundings and not leave any trace of their passing. A cracked tree branch or a bent fern would be all a hunter nin needed to track them down. After an hour, however, they had come close to their target. Daybreak was arriving, and the sky was beginning to lighten. Rat led the team through the last of the tall bamboo forests and onto a small grassy hill overlooking the town. The team stopped and surveyed Alpha Target grimly. What had once been a small farming village was now a blackened, desolate wreck. Several rusty boats lay tipped upside down, pushed up against the shattered pier, and blackened wooden frames suggested that houses had once been built there. Whatever had happened there had happened a while ago because much of the plant life had already begun to overtake the village. Nonetheless, the several dozen heads stuck on sharpened pikes in the middle of the village was still quite clearly visible from where they were standing. Naruto clenched his fists, feeling a sinking sensation forming in the pit of his stomach as he realized that his missions was not going to be as simple as he thought. Shit, he summed up the team's thoughts with a single word. Together, they left the hill and began to approach the village. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.